All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. It's 2 o'clock, and so I wanted to make sure that we go ahead and begin and end promptly. Again, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Cyber Safety for Youth. This webinar is brought to you by our colleagues at the Federal Trade Commission. My name is William Moore, and I'm with the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention's National Training and Technical Assistance Center. And as your technical host, I would like to take a couple of minutes to discuss a few features of the Adobe Connect webinar platform and provide a few announcements to keep in mind. Please note that this event is being recorded and will be published in Tech's YouTube channel. The webinar recording will be archived on Intech's YouTube channel, where you can also view past webinars. For the event transcript and supporting materials, please contact the OJJDP TTA Help Desk. For those wishing to download a copy of the PowerPoint slides and other important documents, you can do so by locating the Handouts pod directly above the chat area. Here, you will also find an FAQ for webinar participants that will locally address any technical related questions. Simply click on the name of the file and then click the download button. During today's webinar, presenters will address questions during our Q&A segment of the webinar. Please type your questions into the chat box as they arrive. For those participating in today's webinar as a group, please take a minute to help us count. Go to the chat window and type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. If you are viewing alone, there's no need to type anything at this time into the chat pod. And I'll give folks just a couple of seconds to do so. Again, please type in the total number of additional people in the room with you today. If you're viewing alone, there's no need to type anything at this time. At the conclusion of today's webinar, you will be provided with a link to following today's webinar, attendees will be sent a certificate of attendance. This certificate is sent approximately 1 hour following the conclusion of the event and is sent via an Adobe Connect thank you email. Please keep an eye on your email for your certificate. Please note that only participants that are registered and signed in will receive a certificate of attendance. And at the conclusion of today's webinar, you will be provided with the link to a brief evaluation about today's presentation. The feedback you provide is used to assist in future planning and training. Today's presenters include Lisa Schifferly, attorney with the Federal Trade Commission, and Ari Lazarus, consumer education specialist with the Federal Trade Commission. I will now turn the webinar over to our presenters for today's presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, William. This is Ari. Thank you all for joining us. Let me move to the next slide. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. We'll start by just reviewing what we're going to go over today. So like William said, we're going to talk about cyber safety for youth today. But we're going to go over a number of topics that you might not traditionally think of when you think about online safety for kids. We're going to go over cybersecurity basics, phishing and tech support scams, online safety, social media, and privacy. And then we're going to jump to identity theft. We're going to talk about some FTC cases that touched on safety, online safety for kids. And then we'll wrap up with some of our free FTC materials. And we will talk a little bit about cybersecurity for organizations that you can use at your home organization. Okay, so before we begin, we're required to give a brief FTC disclaimer, and that is just that Lisa and I speak for ourselves, and the opinions expressed are not those of the Commission or any of the commissioners. So with that, we will go to cybersecurity basics. Okay, so like I said, cybersecurity basics might not be what you think of when you think about online safety for kids, but this stuff is really important for everyone. It's especially great for kids to learn because these basics are great to learn early so they can practice and continue these good habits into adulthood because, as technology keeps evolving, these basics will really be important with all different types of devices and in the future. So here are some basic tips for people to follow to protect their files and devices. So first is to update your software. This is a really big one and also a really easy step for folks to take. So this is keeping your software, including your operating system, the web browsers you use to connect to the internet, and your apps up to date to protect against the latest threats. Most software can actually update automatically, so we recommend you set yours to do so. Outdated software is easier for criminals to break into. And so this is a great way to just improve the protection that you have on your devices in a really easy way. And so we really recommend that folks do that. Second is to back up your files. So no system is completely secure. Copy your files to an external hard drive or cloud storage. If your computer is attacked by malware, you'll still have access to your files. And this tip is also good for ransomware, which we're actually not going to get into today. But the whole idea of ransomware is that a scammer comes in and they take your files, for ransom, and they're asking for money for you to get access to it. But if you have an extra copy of it, they don't really have anything on you. And so it's a really great way to protect you from ransomware. But generally, from any type of malware, it's a great way to preserve your files and data. All right, third one is to use secure passwords. So if the kids that you work with are using any sort of online device or have any sort of online account, they probably are already using passwords. And so this is a really, really great tip just to emphasize the importance of a secure password. A secure password has at least 12 characters. It's a mixture of uppercase and lowercase letters, numbers, and symbols. It's important to avoid common words, phrases, or information in your passwords. So keeping all that stuff in mind and making sure to just reinforce that with the kids you work with, and maybe even recommending that they update their passwords to make sure that they're more secure can be a good thing. Lastly, we have multi-factor authentication. For accounts that support it, multi-factor authentication requires both your password and an additional piece of information to log into your account. That second piece could be a code sent to your phone or a random number generated by an app or a token. And what's really important about multi-factor authentication is that it protects your account even if your password is compromised. So even if someone has your password and is able to attempt to log in, they won't be able to actually gain access to your account unless they also have your phone or that token. So it adds an extra layer of security. And many accounts are enabling multi-factor, so it's great to encourage the kids you work with to select yes if that's an option with an account they sign up for. Okay. All right, so now we're going to switch and talk about some major threats online. So just like the cybersecurity basics, these threats affect everybody. So these are great tips to also share with your colleagues and your friends and family. But they also apply to kids because they're online and Scammers don't necessarily know who they're talking to, or when they send out, these phishing emails or, other types of attacks, they don't know who's on the other side. And so it's really important to share this information about how to keep your devices secure with the kids you work with, if they're online, and they probably are. So we'll start with phishing. This is a common one. It's when a scammer uses a fake email or text or copycat website to get you to share valuable personal information. That could be an account number, a social security number, or your login ID and password. So how it happens. You might get an email or a text that seems to be from someone you know. They might ask you to click on a link or ask to give you a password, your bank account, or other sensitive information. They also might pressure you to act now. And that's so that you kind of don't think about it and don't start to question it. They might tell you that something really bad is going to happen if you don't do it. They might say that your account will be frozen, you'll fail to get a tax refund, your boss will get mad, even that a family member will be hurt or that you could be arrested. In short, they lie to get you to give them information. So it's really important to be able to spot these scams because they can be very good at tricking people and getting them to give up important information. All right, and here I'm going to show you an example of a phishing scam. So this is a phishing email, and it just shows how sophisticated they can be. So here the scammers are spoofing Netflix, and they're asking for account details, and they're saying it's important to do now because there's trouble with the billing information, so that's kind of the urgency piece. And so this has a lot of the red flags of a classic phishing scam. And like I said, they can be very good. I mean, the logo looks correct, even kind of the font and, the colors they use match how Netflix, typically communicates. So it's really important to know the signs of these scams so you can avoid them because these scammers are very sophisticated. So how can you avoid phishing scams? The first is to check it out. So if you think you might have gotten a phishing scam, the first thing is to look up the website or the phone number for the company or person behind the text or email, and make sure that you're getting the real company and not about to download malware or talk to a scammer. Second, talk to someone. So even though the scammer might be trying to rush you and get you to act immediately, one of the best things that we recommend for folks to do is just to take a breath and to take a second and talk to someone. So talking to a friend or an adult in their life to figure out if the request is real or a phishing attempt. Just getting a second opinion can be really helpful in evaluating whether it's a real email or whether it could be a phishing attempt. And then lastly, make a call if you're not sure. So this one is to pick up the phone and call that vendor or person who sent the email. So if you're getting an email from a friend or you're getting an email from a company, calling them from a number you know to be true and confirming that the information's right. And make sure to use a number that you know to be correct and not the number in the email or text, because that could also just lead you back to the scammer. So that's phishing. And then another scam that is pretty common that I wanted to talk about is tech support scams. So tech support scams often start with a phone call, a pop-up, or an email telling you that there's a problem with your computer. Often scammers are behind these calls and messages, and they just want to get your money, personal information, or access to your files. To gain your trust, the scammers may pretend to be from a well-known tech company like Microsoft. They might even use lots of technical terms to convince you that the problems with your computer are real. And they may ask you to open some files or run a scam on your computer and then tell you that those scans show that there's a problem, even if there isn't. So This one's really important, and I think a lot of times it gets promoted, for older adults. But again, like I said, these scams can affect, anybody. When you're on a computer, one of these alerts can just pop up, and so it's really important to share these kind of scams with kids because, like I said, they're using this technology and they could be giving away important information or possibly paying these scammers. So it's important to share it. All right, let's go a little bit more about the tech support scams and how they work. So scammers, after they've made you believe that they're the real thing, they may ask you to give them remote access to your computer, which lets them access all the information stored on it and on any network connected to it. They might try to install malware that gives them access to your computer and sensitive data like usernames and passwords. They can also try to enroll you in a worthless computer maintenance or warranty program. Or they might try to direct you to websites and ask you to enter a credit card, bank account, or other personal information. Again, just to get money, and of course not actually trying to help you fix your computer. And they in fact might be trying to install malware and actually trying to make your computer worse off than it was to begin with. So this is a really good one to look out for. And here we have kind of a rough representation of what they might look like. So like I said, it could be a pop-up telling you that, that a threat's been detected. You need to call this number now. And so it's really important to know that these are scams and the signs to look out for because they really can do a lot of damage. And so that's sort of an example of what they can look like. And now let's go. Okay, so I just do want to touch on one other thing. So if you do think that there is a problem with your computer, the first thing you should do is to update your computer security software and run a scan. And that's important because you want to make sure that your security software is up to date, which of course I kind of said at the beginning, to make sure it has the latest patches and all that good stuff so that when it runs the scan, it's able to catch everything properly and kind of fix the computer. And if you do need help fixing a problem, we recommend you go to someone you know and trust. And we have lots of advice on our website about how to find a company like that. But if you're, in terms of talking to kids, this is probably just a point that they would want to bring an adult in. So we generally recommend if they're not familiar with how security software works and running a scan, they just reach out to a trusted adult. Okay, so we started with kind of cyber basics and two of the big online threats. Now we're going to switch gears and talk a bit about online safety, social media, and privacy, which is probably more what you were expecting out of this presentation. So we'll kind of touch on that because those things are also really important. And we'll start with chatting with kids about being online. So, excuse me one second. What is the best way to protect kids online? Talking to them. Talking to them early and often is one of the best ways that you can protect kids online. So, and this should start early, as in as soon as kids start using a phone, a mobile device, or computer, it's time to talk to them about online behavior and safety. Another important thing is to use everyday opportunities to talk about online safety. So even if your kids are comfortable approaching you, don't wait for them to start the conversation. Use everyday opportunities. So that could be like a news story about cyberbullying or texting while driving, and that can start a conversation about their experiences and your expectations. It's also important to resist the urge to rush through these conversations. Most kids will need to hear this information repeated in small doses for it to really sink in. And if you keep talking with your kids, your patience and persistence will pay off. It's important to work hard to keep the lines of communication open, even if you learn that your kid has done something online and you find inappropriate. Listening and taking their feelings into account can help keep conversations afloat. And even if you don't have all the answers, being honest about that can go a long way to building a strong relationship. And then lastly, one of the basics, basic tips that we encourage folks to do is to really encourage kids trust their guts if they have suspicions while they're online. So if they feel threatened by someone or uncomfortable because of something online, encourage them to tell a trusted adult. And you can help them report their concerns to the police and to social networking sites. And many of these sites have links for users to report abusive, suspicious, or inappropriate behavior. So there are generally routes for them to go. We always encourage folks to reach out to a trusted adult. Okay, so let's see. Online actions have consequences. So when kids are online, they should only post what they're comfortable with others seeing. So it's really important to emphasize with kids that that some of their profile may be seen by a broader audience than they even realize. So even if their privacy settings are really high, it's important for them to know that it's possible for others to access the information they're putting out there. So encourage your child to think about the language they use online and to think before posting pictures and videos or altering photos posted by someone else. Employers, college admissions officers, coaches, teachers, and police may view your child's posts. So it's important that they know the stuff they're putting out there is essentially public. It's also important to remind kids that once they post it, they can't take it back. So even if they delete the information from a site, you have little control over older versions, so cached versions that may exist on other people's computers and may circulate online. So it's really important that they think before they post. And then lastly, it's important to tell the kids you work with not to impersonate someone else. So tell them that it's wrong to create sites or pages that seem to come from someone else, like a teacher, a classmate, or someone they made up, because all of these actions have consequences. All right. So along with that, it's important to encourage kids to limit what they share. And so part of that is helping them understand what information should stay private. So some things like about themselves or family members and friends should be kept to themselves. In addition, information like their social security number, street address, phone number, and family financial information should also stay private and shouldn't be shared online. Also, another topic that can come up is the sexting. And so it's important to talk to teens that you're working with to avoid sex talk online. We actually have research that shows that teens who don't talk about sex with strangers online are less likely to come in contact with predators. So researchers have found that predators usually don't pose as children or teens, and most teens who are contacted by adults they don't know find it creepy. So teens should really avoid this type of talk, and they shouldn't hesitate to ignore or block these folks if they interact with them online. Okay. All right, and then I'm going to wrap up with cyberbullying. So this is obviously another hot topic in online safety. So it's really important to talk to kids about cyberbullying. Tell your kids that they can't hide behind the words that they type and the images they post. Bullying is a lose-lose situation, and these hurtful messages do more than just make the target feel bad, but they also make the sender look bad. And so it's important to encourage the kids you work with to let you know if an online message or image makes them feel threatened or hurt. And if you fear for the kids' safety, it's important to contact the police. And it's also good when you're kind of trying to review what your kids are doing online to read the comments, because cyberbullying often involves mean-spirited comments. And it's good to check out your kid's page from time to time to see what you find. And then the last two signs of cyberbullying are to recognize the signs of the cyberbully. So it's important to know if it's the kids that you're working with who are the bully. So you want to look for signs of bullying behavior, such as creating mean images of another kid. And it's also important to recognize that you are also a model for your kids. So it's good to model behavior that doesn't look like bullying, and because kids can learn things like gossip and other negative behaviors from the adults in their lives. And lastly, it's important to help stop cyberbullying. So if your kid witnesses cyberbullying happening to someone else, encourage him or her to try to stop it by telling the bully to stop and by not engaging or forwarding anything. Researchers have found that bullying usually stops pretty quickly when peers intervene on behalf of the victim. And one other way to help stop bullying online is to report it to a site or network where you see it. So that's also an effective method there. All right, well with that kind of wraps up my portion. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Lisa, and she's going to talk about identity theft.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. I'm going to talk about three different things. I'll start with identity theft for youth and then highlight a few FTC cases that relate to youth and online safety, and then finally wrap things up by talking about how you can protect children's personal information in your organization. So first let's talk about identity theft, and what I'm talking about here is when somebody misuses someone's personal information, not just having the information exposed, but actually having it misused. And when you talk about young people in identity theft, one of the big challenges is basically even getting them to care about this, because they have so many things going on in their life. They probably often think that identity theft isn't going to happen to them and don't really want to listen to older people about anything, much less identity theft. So one of the things we've found helpful in terms of getting young adults to actually care about identity theft is to focus on independence, and that if they are a victim of identity theft, it may make it more difficult to get into college or to get loans for college, to pay for college, to get car loans, to get credit cards, to rent an apartment, or to get a job. And focusing on the impacts that identity theft can have may help getting young people to focus on the steps they need to take to protect themselves from identity theft. So I'm going to go over a few different tips that we have specifically for young adults to reduce the risk of identity theft, but they really apply to anyone. The first tip is to protect your Social Security number, because your Social Security number, as you may know, is the key to many types of identity theft. With your Social Security number, tax identity theft can be perpetrated because what they do is they take that Social Security number, and even if you're a kid who doesn't yet work, they can make up phony wages and file to try to get a tax refund. And if you're an older young person, and 18, 19, 20, and maybe you are working, then you may have trouble getting your refund because somebody else has gotten it. Also, the Social Security number can be used to help people open new accounts. So really we try to train people not to carry their Social Security card along with them. Usually young people these days know that. There used to be a day and age when people were told to carry it around with them along with their driver's license, but now all young people should know, and please help them know this if they don't already, to keep that Social Security number locked safely at home, not carried around with them. And also not to put it on forms and documents or online. just because it's asked for. A lot of times places ask for it when they really don't need it. So it's important to ask why someone is asking for your Social Security number and only provide it if it's really needed. Another big step to reduce the risk of identity theft is locking up your phone. We recently did a session with some young adults, and a whole bunch of them said, my phone is my life. And really, for a lot of people throughout all different age groups, phones have tons and tons of personal information on them. And so it's really important to lock that phone by using a passcode or by using biometrics like fingertip touch, or if someone has one of the fancy new phones, face recognition. Also to have different passcodes for different apps, like if you do online banking or PayPal, have a different passcode so that if someone somehow is able to get into your phone, they can't just use the same passcode then to get into all the other apps as well. The third tip we have is to lock down your computer. In addition to your phone, you got to make sure your computer is safe. And some things to do that are to have a firewall. That may sound complicated, but actually a lot of people have firewalls without even knowing it. If you use a router, that's considered to be a hardware firewall. And if you want a software firewall, Windows comes with a firewall by default. So most people have this part taken care of. The other things to make sure are to have antivirus, anti-malware, and anti-spyware software on your computer, and to make sure that those are all updated and patched. Even major corporations are failing to update and patch their software regularly, and that can lead to massive data breaches. And for an individual, it can lead to hackers being able to get into your computer and into your personal files. So it's really important to update those, or as Ari said, set them to auto-update and make it easy on yourself. Another tip that picks up on one that Ari mentioned before in the cyber basics portion is to use strong passwords. This can't really be emphasized enough. It has to be a longer password is stronger, a mix of uppercase, lowercase, numbers, special characters, and consider passphrases like a sentence instead of a password. Like in this example, someone is using, how much wood could a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? And that turns into HMWC1WCC question mark. So you're basically using the first letter from each of those words in the sentence to be your passphrase. And you could think of anything. It could be like, I like the Washington Nationals, or something longer than that. But think of a sentence or passphrase that's meaningful to you, and use those first letters as your passphrase. And again, it's important to use different passwords or passphrases for different accounts and different websites or different apps, so that if one password is exposed, then the hacker can't use that to get into every single account that you have online. It's also good, some people say, well, how can I remember all those passwords? And some people may want to consider using a password manager. One tip I want to really emphasize about passwords for young people is not to share passwords. It used to be that getting a key to someone's apartment was the sign of a budding relationship, but now sharing your password could be a sign of that. But really, we have seen that sharing passwords can then lead to trouble, even stalking and abusive behavior, especially if a relationship goes south after that password is shared. So people should not share their passwords with friends or partners. Another tip is to brush up on your privacy settings, and this can be a really good one to emphasize with young people who may be more open to sharing a lot of things online than older people. Just to remind them to choose what they share and who they share it with, and to remember that even if they think they're just sharing it with their friend, that friend may further share it. So they really got to think about anything they share. If it goes out to the whole school or the whole world, how are they going to feel about it? And it's important to check the privacy settings. Like this shows an example of how to check if you're just sharing with friends or sharing publicly. But check them regularly, because sometimes different companies change their privacy default settings, and so even if you've set them, they may not be what you think they are. So it's a good practice to try to check regularly what your privacy settings are and readjust them if needed. And for young people, to remind them not to add friends that they don't know. It can be tempting to think this is a great way to meet people. But from talking to people that we know who work within Department of Justice's Child Exploitation Division, I can tell you that they say that a lot of child exploitation cases come from someone who met the child online. So if you think about it, you train kids not to let strangers into the house, but it's also good to train them not to let them into their computer and into their phone or their online life. Another big tip is we're saying toss stinky fish, but this is what Ari already talked about in terms of phishing, which is to train young people to recognize phishing so they don't think that it's their bank or Netflix that are sending them these emails when it's really a scammer. A good rule of thumb is to, not to click on links or reply or send personal information through emails. Another big tip to reduce the risk of identity theft, especially for young people, is to protect personal information at home. This could be true for a foster child that's moving from location to location, or it could be true for a young adult who may live in a dormitory or in a group house with other young people where each person has a room in the house. This actually happened to my brother-in-law when he was living with some other people. One of the roommates broke into his room and took his credit card and misused it for identity theft. So it's important to lock and secure documents and personal information at home, not to leave information out so that others who are coming through the house might have access to it, and to shred sensitive personal information when you're done with it, not just put it out in the trash where someone else might find it. Another tip we have for reducing the risk of identity theft is don't do your banking where you have your latte. That may sound silly. No one's saying, oh, don't bank at a coffee shop. What we're really trying to say here is that the public Wi-Fi that is readily available at coffee shops, libraries, and other places is not secure, and it is not a good place for people to be transmitting personal information. We've been told that a first-year computer science student can easily hack into any public Wi-Fi network, and I would venture a guess that a lot of 14-year-olds can hack into any public Wi-Fi network. So it's really not a safe place to transmit any sort of personal or banking information when you're on a public Wi-Fi network. This just has a summary of the tips to pass on to young people to help protect and reduce the risk of identity theft. Protect your social security number, lock up your phone and your computer, use strong passwords, remember those privacy settings, teach them about phishing scams, and protect personal information at home and when you're outside the home, and don't do anything personal or financial on public Wi-Fi. Now I'm going to turn to tell you about a few of the FTC's recent cases that have to do with children's privacy. You may know that the FTC brings law enforcement cases when there are data breach issues or when a company does not have reasonable and appropriate data security, and we've done that in more than 50 cases. We also bring cases under the Federal Trade Commission Act if a company is misrepresenting their services. And finally, we bring cases under the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, which is designed to give parents of children under the age of 13 control over the collection and sharing of their personal information. They're supposed to get notice and consent before young children's personal information is collected and shared. So one case that I want to highlight is the case against Musical.ly or TikTok. This is the FTC's largest settlement under COPPA, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. The FTC and Department of Justice jointly got a $5.7 million settlement against TikTok and required them to take offline all recordings by children under age 13. If you're not familiar with TikTok, it basically allowed anyone to create short videos lip-syncing music or otherwise singing music and then share them with people. And when they did, they'd give their email, photo, first and last name, and a bio. You could also direct message people, and the profiles were made public by default. And at the time the case was brought, TikTok did not notify parents about the collection and use of their kids' personal information. People could even find users within 50 miles of them, so adults could use TikTok to find kids. So fortunately, the FTC settlement has required TikTok to comply with COPPA, but it's something to be aware of when working with kids, because there are all sorts of other similar things out there that they could be using that could have similar issues. This is just a reminder to have them brush up on their privacy settings. This shows how they could change their settings in TikTok so that they are just sharing with people they know and not with the general public. Like I said, the profiles were made public by default, so it's good to go in and check and change those to being friends only, not public. And as I mentioned, we did get a $5.7 million settlement in this case, and also required them to take offline all recordings that were done by children under the age of 13. Another big case to be aware of is the Snapchat case. This is a little bit older case in 2014. At that time, Snapchat was saying that their messages would disappear forever. People were sending messages or photos and were told that it would just last 1 to 10 seconds after it was viewed and then would disappear forever. But in actuality, those messages or images were still stored on the device, and you could find them if you plugged your phone into your computer. They would still be there. So the FTC brought suit against Snapchat because they misrepresented the fact that the messages would disappear forever, and they also misrepresented their data security policies and practices according to the FTC's complaint. So the big things to remind kids about Snapchats are, again, to know your friends, and before you send a photo, video, or message, consider how you'd feel if it reached a broader audience than you intend, and also to manage the settings so only friends can send photos to you. And as I already mentioned, block or report anyone who harasses you. And again, make sure online friends really are friends and not people posing as friends to get your information or to get to you. I do want to mention one other case that we don't have a slide about because it's just hot off the presses, and that is the WildDeck case. The FTC just issued warning letters against WildDeck, which is the maker of dating apps FastMeet, Meet24, and Meet4A. And those dating apps allow kids to post profiles, and the FTC sent a warning letter saying, hey, we think this violates COPPA, because again, kids could search online for kids in their area. And so we have asked the company to comply with COPPA. We are monitoring to make sure that they do comply, and the app companies have taken the apps down until they comply, and new versions may come up, but they should not allow kids under the age of 13 to create profiles. So those are some of the cases we have. I also want to highlight some of the resources we have that may be of use to you, and these are all available in bulk for free at ftc.gov/kidsonline. You can find our NetCetera publication about talking with kids about online safety, and Heads Up, which is a publication for kids. You can order these, as many as you want, in bulk for free and share them at bulkorder.ftc.gov or ftc.gov/bulkorder. And I want to turn now to the cybersecurity portion of our presentation and cybersecurity for organizations, because as employees of nonprofits, it's also important that you all know how to protect kids' data so that they don't become identity theft victims. That's another important step, in addition to teaching kids directly about steps they can take, is that we all take steps with the information we have to protect it so it's not exposed. So the FTC has created a series of articles and materials at ftc.gov/smallbusiness, but they're really good for nonprofits and others as well. They go over things to think about, like physical security. This is one of the modules we have there, and for each module we have a fact sheet, and then we also have quizzes, and for some of them we have videos. And so physical security goes over things like storing things securely and limiting access to only people who need to know. So if you have physical files about children, everyone in the organization may not need to have access to them. Only people who actually need them for a legitimate job purpose should have access and keys to those documents, whether they're online or in print. It's also important to keep stock of what you have so that if you do have a data breach, you know what is lost and what is not lost. And training employees is really important if you work in an organization to share your knowledge with other employees and with colleagues about a lot of things you learned today, things like shredding, things like properly disposing of data before you get rid of a computer or a cell phone, things that Ari talked about like using multi-factor authentication. Those are all good tips to pass on. Another big tip is to secure remote access, and what we're talking about is maybe if you work at home or somehow remote into the network, to make sure that you're using the same safety precautions, and before letting anyone connect remotely, to make sure that they have the same safety and security protocols on the device they're connecting from remotely as they would if they were connecting directly into the network. So it's important to do things also like changing preset router passwords and keeping antivirus up to date and using encryption. And there's a lot more on these fact sheets that you can find at ftc.gov/smallbusiness, but I just want to give you a really quick snapshot of some of the big tips. Another one is vendor security, because most organizations work with other organizations, whether it's for payroll processing or for other aspects of your particular organization's objectives. And so you don't want somebody who you're working with who may have weak data security to reflect poorly on your organization. So it is important when you're working with vendors to put your expectations in writing and then to not just take their word for it, but to verify compliance. And also be flexible and make changes as needed, because something that works when you first enter into a contract may change in 6 months or a year. Another great resource if you do encounter a data breach, or if you're working with any young person who is a victim of identity theft, is identitytheft.gov. It allows people to report identity theft, and when they do, they get a personalized recovery plan that walks them through all the steps to take for their particular type of identity theft. It also will give them letters to send to credit reporting agencies and creditors to clear up their problem. It's available in English and in Spanish online. If you go to identitytheft.gov in the upper right-hand corner, you can click over to the Spanish version of the site. So this is our names and information. And we're also available now to take questions.
Okay, so I know that there's lots of questions about the citation around the stuff I was saying about sexting, and I think there was one other data point I put out there. We do have those. We do have those references in our NetCetera. We don't have the citations in there, so I'm going to have to do some research and get back to you. So I'll reach back out to William, and he can share that with you if we're able to share that. So I don't have that for you right now, but I appreciate everyone's interest, and I will check into that.
And I see a question here.
Thank you, Ari. Thank you, Ari. And yeah, just wanted to remind folks that you can contact OJJDP Help Desk and we can get that information to you. Sorry to interrupt. Just wanted to remind folks of the help desk that they can contact that information. Thank you.
Sure. And I see a question that says, the hospital sent me a letter that said it breached my information, but my granddaughter's too. It's currently back in the system. What do you suggest I do? Well, if your information has been exposed, you can go to identitytheft.gov/data breach, and it'll give you tips on what to do to protect your identity based on the type of information that was exposed. If it was medical information, if it was your social security number, if it was your name, address, and all that personal information, it'll give you steps like place a fraud alert or consider a credit freeze and other steps that you can take for free to protect your identity. But the best place to go is identitytheft.gov, and then you can get specific information for your particular situation.
Okay, and I saw a question about where someone could find cyberbullying resources and videos. So we actually have a great cyberbullying video that you can find at ftc.gov/kidsonline. We also have resources on that topic in both our NetCetera, which like I think both Lisa and I said was kind of the guide for parents and educators and folks that work with kids, as well as our Heads Up, which is our publication that's made for kids, written in more kid-friendly language. So those are two that I'd recommend that you start with.
And I see a question here about what the settlement funds will or have already gone to, and how will parents know if any changes have been made in reference to TikTok and Snapchat privacy issues. I mean, a good thing to do is to check the privacy settings with those companies and with the apps to see what's going on in terms of the privacy settings. The companies are both under order with the FTC, so if they violate the order and they're not complying with COPPA or they're not being on the up and up in terms of not having any misrepresentations, then that means that we can get a enforcement order against them and fines and penalties. So there is definitely a big incentive for them to comply now that they're under order to do so. The best way to keep in touch and find out more about any of our settlements and what's happening in terms of redress or other, updates about cases and money that's come in or action that's been taken is to sign up for our blogs, which you can do at ftc.gov/subscribe, and that will tell you about the latest cases and information and updates about redress and money going to people.
And if you go to that website, ftc.gov/subscribe, you'll see a few different email blasts to sign up for. Make sure and sign up for the consumer updates.
Okay, there's a question here that says, when law enforcement takes identity fraud reports, should they be giving out the information to the victims to contact identitytheft.gov? That's a good question, and in fact, yeah, we have worked with the IACP to make that part of the protocols for chiefs of police to refer people to identitytheft.gov. So we do appreciate that people in law enforcement do give out identitytheft.gov to victims because it will give them a personalized recovery plan of the steps to take. The hope is that identitytheft.gov makes it easier not only for consumers but also for law enforcement because our identity theft report often will suffice, but if somebody has gone to the police first, if the police takes their report, they can also refer them to identitytheft.gov, and we've even created wallet cards for those of you who are in law enforcement, or really any of you can order them, but they're designed for law enforcement so you can carry them around, these wallet cards that have the identitytheft.gov information, and hand them out to ID theft victims.
Okay, I see a question. What age should a young adult be before they get involved with social media? So that's another good question. That's not something that we at the FTC have hard and fast rules on. We think that it's really important to be having open and honest communications about what kids are doing online, and to talk to kids about being safe online, including being safe on social media. And so unfortunately we don't have any guidance on that, but we do just encourage open and honest communications on the topic. And I see, what was the heads up one? So yes, so we have the Net Cetera publication, which, like I said, is for educators, parents, and other folks that work with kids about how to have a conversation about online safety. And then to complement that, we have Heads Up, which is for kids about online safety. And so it talks directly to kids. And you can get both of those publications at ftc.gov/bulk order.
I see we're getting near the top of the hour, so we'll turn it back to William to wrap up the presentation.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you all for joining today. And we really appreciate you all for coming on for today's webinar. I hope you all found that the information today was helpful and useful in your respective professions. Please note that you may contact Intact through the website displayed on this slide. You can stay up to date on the latest information by signing up for Intact's TTA listserv. Also, don't forget to check us out on Facebook at OJJDP TTA. You can also contact the OJJDP via the help desk by following the contact information on this slide. And do you have a training and technical assistance need? So please submit a request via OJJDP's TTA 360 platform through the link displayed on this slide. And as a reminder, the webinar recording will be archived on Intact's YouTube channel, where you can also view past webinars. And for the event transcript and other supporting materials, please contact the OJJDP TTA help desk. If everyone could, please take a few seconds to read this disclaimer. And lastly, we would appreciate if everyone could take about 5 minutes to complete the feedback evaluation. And thank you all for joining us today. Everyone have a great afternoon. Take care.